The steering wheel vibrated under Elena Valdés's bloodied hands. The corporate Audi, which 2 days earlier had been her symbol of success, was now her moving coffin. The torrential rain turned the mountain road into a treacherous river of mud. "Just an accounting error, Elena," her boss, Alarcon, had said with a smile that didn't reach his cold eyes. "An error you must forget." But it wasn't an error. It was millions of euros diverted to a shell company called Aqua Pura Filtrations. And then the horrible discovery. It wasn't a leak. It was dumping. Deliberate chemical dumping into the aquifer of 3 rural towns. She had taken the hard drive, a stupid and brave impulse. And that same night, the truck that ran the red light and crushed her against the river median. She had survived by pure luck. She got out of the wrecked car, got into the first rental car she found, and drove. She drove toward the only place where no one would think to look for her. Nowhere. The engine of her small rental car coughed. The dashboard lights flickered and went out. "No, no, no, not now," she screamed. The car slid in the mud and stopped. Dead. She was alone, in the middle of the worst storm of the year, on a mountain road that didn't appear on her GPS. Panic, cold and sharp, seized her. They were getting closer. She could feel them. 3 kilometers from the dead road, Tomás Herrera put another log in the wood stove. The fire was the only thing in the house that seemed alive. Outside, the storm was battering his farm, La Cicatrice, the scar, with personal fury. It had been 5 years since he'd spoken to anyone but the village shopkeeper, and only what was necessary. 5 years since his wife and daughter's car slid on ice on this same road. 5 years since he became the lonely farmer, a hermit on his own land, punishing himself for not having been with them. His life was a ritual of exhausting work and absolute silence. A noise broke that silence. It wasn't the storm. It was his dog, Sombra, Shadow, a German shepherd as silent and broken as him, growling at the front door. Tomás tensed. No one came to La Cicatrice. He grabbed the double-barreled shotgun that always rested by the door. He opened the door an inch. Rain burst in. At first he saw nothing, only the night. Then Sombra barked. A figure was crawling up the driveway, a small figure covered in mud that collapsed 20 meters from his porch. Tomás cursed under his breath. This was a problem from the outside world. And he wanted nothing to do with the outside world. He went out into the rain, with the shotgun pointing down. "Get out of here! This is private property!" The figure didn't move. He reached her. It was a woman. Her face was pale as marble, with an ugly cut on her temple. She wore expensive clothes, now destroyed. She was shaking, on the verge of hypothermia. "Damn it," he muttered, with a sigh that seemed to tear all the anger from his 5 years of solitude from his entrails. He lifted her. She was light as an injured bird. Her head fell against his chest, and a small moan escaped her lips. He laid her on the old leather sofa in front of the fireplace. Sombra sniffed her cautiously and then, surprisingly, lay down at her feet. Tomás watched her. She was everything he hated. From the city, rich, with problems. She brought the smell of expensive perfume mixed with the metallic smell of blood. He cleaned the wound on her forehead. His hands, accustomed to rough wood and cold metal, were surprisingly careful. She shuddered under his touch, but didn't wake up. He removed her soaked jacket. Something heavy fell from an inside pocket, an external hard drive clumsily wrapped in a plastic bag. He held it in his hand. It was a strange object in his world of earth and wood. He saw the label, Consorcio Alarcón, Confidential. The name rang a bell. They were the idiots from the capital who had bought all the valley farms, promising jobs and bringing only dust. The woman on his sofa moaned. Her eyes snapped open, unfocused and full of terror. Where am I?" she stammered. Nowhere, he said, his voice deep. You're in my house. Elena saw him. An enormous man with several days' unkempt beard, a pale scar on his cheek, and the firelight casting threatening shadows on his face. And in his hand he held the hard drive. No, she screamed, trying to sit up. Give that back to me. What is this? He asked, not moving. Why are they chasing you? I don't know what you're talking about. I had an accident. You're lying, he said calmly. People have accidents. They don't end up at my door with corporate evidence and looking like they've seen the devil. Who's chasing you? Before she could answer, car lights swept across the front window. 2 black trucks, large and menacing, were slowly advancing up his driveway. They stopped next to Elena's dead rental car. Elena's heart stopped. Oh, God! They found me! They found me! Tomás looked out the window. He saw 2 men get out of the truck. They didn't look like farmers. They wore dark suits under raincoats and moved with professional efficiency that chilled his blood. He turned to Elena. Panic made her tremble. They're going to kill me, she whispered. And now they're going to kill you too. Tomás looked at the shotgun by the door. Then he looked at the terrified woman on his sofa. He had spent 5 years avoiding the world, and tonight the world had come to knock down his door. He walked to the door, loaded the shotgun with 2 cartridges. The sound of the click-clack was the loudest in the room. He turned to Elena, his eyes dark and unreadable. Stay behind me, and don't make a sound. The sound of heavy boots splashing in the mud echoed louder than the storm itself. The men's flashlight beams cut through the darkness, examining Elena's abandoned car and then, inevitably, moving toward the house. Elena was crouched behind the sofa, her body trembling so violently she feared they could hear her. Please, she whispered, though she didn't know to whom she was praying. Don't let them in. Tomás didn't respond. He was near the window, motionless as a stone statue. He wasn't watching the men. He was watching the darkness behind them, the way the wind moved in the pines, the places where a man could hide. One of the men, a tall, thin silhouette, shouted, We know she's in there, Miss Valdés. Come out and make this easy. His voice was calm, almost bored, which made it even more terrifying. The other man, more stocky, approached the porch. He put a foot on the first step. Private property, Tomás growled, his voice resonating in the night, not as a shout, but like thunder. The men stopped, their flashlights instantly focused on the door. We don't want trouble with you, friend, said the thin man, his voice now dripping with false friendliness. We're just looking for a woman who stole something from our employer. She's dangerous. Probably armed. I don't see any woman, said Tomás, his voice emotionless. And the only dangerous thing here is me. Get your foot off my porch. There was a tense pause. The stocky man looked at his partner, who gave a slight nod. In a quick movement, the stocky man climbed onto the porch and tried to force the door. The sound of the shotgun firing inside the cabin was deafening. It wasn't a shot to kill. Tomás shot at the lock of his own door. The explosion of lead and wood made the stocky man recoil with a scream, grabbing his face where the splinters had reached him. The next one goes to the chest, Tomás shouted. Elena let out a small scream, which she quickly stifled with her hands. He's crazy, shouted the injured man. Come on, shoot him. No, shouted the leader. Alarcon wants the hard drive intact. We can't risk a fire or destroy the evidence. He dragged his companion back toward the darkness of the trucks. We can't catch her if he's protecting her. Let's pull back and wait. She can't stay there forever. The truck doors closed. The engines didn't start. The lights went out. They hadn't left. They were watching. The silence inside the cabin was thick. The smell of gunpowder filled the air. Elena finally stood up, her legs like jelly. They're still out there, she stammered. I know, said Tomás. He was calmly reloading the shotgun, his movements methodical. His hand was steady. What are we going to do?" "We aren't going to do anything," he said, leaning the shotgun against the wall. "I'm going to do. You're going to stay still." He went to the kitchen and took an old kerosene lamp. "What's that?" she asked. "They cut the power," he said, and when she looked up, the few electric lights that were on had died. "They're at the road pole. They're waiting for us to get scared. They're waiting for the cold to drive us out." He lit the lamp. The warm, golden light filled the room, casting long, dancing shadows. Tomás's face looked like that of a man from another era. "They underestimate how accustomed I am to the cold," he murmured. He looked at her. She was still pale, but her breathing was calming. She hadn't broken down. "You're hurt," he said, noticing how she winced when she moved. It's just a cut." "No," he said, pointing to her side. There was a dark stain spreading across her expensive blazer. "The car accident." Before she could protest, he took his first aid kit, the same one he used for his animals, and a pitcher of clean water from his cistern. "Sit," he ordered, not with anger, but with quiet authority. She sat on the sofa, and he carefully lifted her blouse. It was more than a cut. A piece of metal had torn her. It wasn't deep, but it was bleeding profusely. Elena braced for the pain of antiseptic, but he was surprisingly gentle. He cleaned the wound with an efficiency that wasn't just practiced, it was careful. His hands, rough as tree bark, touched her skin as if it were something delicate. "I was a veterinarian," he said quietly, as if answering an unasked question. "A long time ago. Before this." "Tomás," she whispered, trying his name. He looked up. Their eyes met over the lamplight. She saw a sadness so deep it took her breath away. "What happened to you?" she asked, her voice soft. "The outside world happened," he said, refocusing on her wound. "Just like it happened to you." He finished putting on the bandage. "That'll hold." They sat in silence, the only sound being the diminishing rain and the crackling of the wood he put in the fire. "They're going to come in," said Elena, her voice regaining some of its analytical strength. "They're not going to wait forever. They know I have the hard drive. They're going to take the risk." "They can try," said Tomás. "This house was built in 1920. The walls are stone. The windows are small. It was built to withstand harsh winters and bad men." He looked at the fire. "My great-grandfather built it." "They have guns, Tomás. I saw them." "So did I," he said. "But I have this." He tapped his own forehead. "This is my land. I know every inch of it. They only know violence." He got up and went to a large wooden trunk in a corner, one she had assumed was full of blankets. He opened it. It was full of topographic maps and old radios. "Are you a doomsday prepper?" she asked, trying to make a joke. "I was a ham radio operator," he said. "My wife used to say it was my only vice. It was how I traveled the world without leaving the farm." He pulled out a battery-operated shortwave radio. "There's no cell signal," he said. "But shortwave can bounce around the world if the atmosphere is right. And after a storm, the atmosphere is always right." He began adjusting the dials, and a screech filled the room. "They're watching us," she said. "If they see the light—" "They can't see the basement," he said with a slight hint of a smile. He opened a trapdoor in the floor that she hadn't even noticed, hidden under a bearskin rug. A smell of cold earth and apples rose. "The cellar," he said. "It's where we're going to make our call." The darkness of the tunnel was absolute. Elena swallowed her terror, the smell of ancient earth filling her lungs. Her only guide was the touch of the cold, damp stone wall against her fingers. Behind her, she could hear the muffled roar of the fire beginning to take over the house, and above it all, a single cry of fury and pain. Tomas's cry. That sound fueled her legs. She ran, stumbling on the uneven ground, the hard drive pressed against her chest like armor. Each step was agony in her injured ankle, but his kiss, his sacrifice, burned brighter than the pain. She burst into the barn, falling onto a pile of old hay. The barn was dark, smelling of dust and rusty metal. Outside, the world was orange. The farmhouse, the house where Tomás had lived his penance for 5 years, was a column of furious flames roaring against the night sky. Screams echoed, shots. But they weren't the controlled shots of hunters. They were screams of panic. "The gasoline! The propane tank!" shouted a voice. Elena saw the silhouettes of the 2 men, illuminated against the fire. They were no longer attacking. They were retreating in panic, trying to get back to their trucks, trapped between the hell they had created and something else. A figure emerged from the flames like an avenging demon. Tomás. He wasn't on fire, but he was wrapped in smoke and fury. He had his woodcutter's axe in his hand. The stocky man turned to shoot, but Tomás was faster. He threw the axe. The sound that followed was horrible and brief. The thin man, the leader, reached his truck. He didn't look back. He started it, the tires spinning in the mud, desperate to escape. And that's when he saw Elena standing in the barn doorway, a silhouette against the fire, holding the hard drive. "The woman," he hissed, braking the car. He had his choice: flee or finish the job. Greed won. He got out of the car, raising his weapon. "Give me that damn—" A single shotgun blast echoed, louder than the fire. It came from the barn roof. The thin man looked at his chest, an expression of surprise on his face, before falling to his knees and then face first into the mud. Elena looked up. Tomás was on the thatched roof, the old hunting shotgun still smoking in his hand. He had saved her. He had protected her. He had deceived her. He wasn't in the fire. The tunnel, she realized, must have had another exit. He had sent her to the barn, knowing it was safe, while he flanked his enemies. He never intended to die. He intended to fight. She ran to him as he descended from the roof, his body covered in soot, his leg bleeding profusely, but his eyes alive. Alive for the first time in 5 years. "You—" she began, breathless, hitting his chest with her fists. "You kissed me. I thought you were saying goodbye." He grabbed her wrists, his expression serious, but a glint in his eyes. "I was," he said, his voice hoarse. "I was saying goodbye to the ghost I was." She threw herself into his arms, kissing him, the taste of smoke, gunpowder, and survival on his lips. The sound of sirens approached. Tomás's ham radio. His call hadn't been intercepted. It had been real. His radio contacts had called the state police, bypassing the corrupt locals. 6 months later. The spring sun shone in a conference room in the capital. Elena Valdés, now a partner in her own law firm, stood at the end of a long table. "And so," she said, as a slide presentation showed the irrefutable evidence from the hard drive, "the Alarcon Consortium not only knowingly poisoned 3 communities, but also used murder and coercion to cover it up. They're finished." The applause from the locals and their legal teams was thunderous. Elena smiled, a genuine, tired smile. She had won. Later that night, she drove, not an Audi, but an old pickup truck, along the mountain road. The road was repaired. The farm, La Cicatrice, no longer existed. In its place, the foundations of a new house were being built, a house with large windows overlooking the valley. The barn was still standing, and that's where she headed. The lights were on. Inside, it was no longer a dust warehouse. Tomás, with his leg now healed, but with a slight limp that said it made him more charming, was working on a lathe. He was building furniture. He looked up when she entered, and the smile he gave her warmed her more than any fire. "How did it go, lawyer?" he asked, wiping his hands on a rag. "We won," she said softly. "They're going to prison forever." He dropped the rag and walked to her. He took her hands, hands that now had some calluses from helping on the farm. "And now?" he asked. "Now," she said, leaning into his smell of sawdust and coffee. "We have to decide where to put the sofa." He laughed, a deep, real sound that filled the barn. "I was thinking of not having a sofa, just a very large fireplace. We'll have a sofa," she said with a smile. He drew her closer. 5 years, he whispered against her hair. "I thought my life ended on that road, but it was just a long winter, Elena, and you are the spring." He kissed her, not with the desperation of fire, but with the slow, sure promise of a man who had finally come home. The lonely farmer was no longer alone. He was just cultivating a new life. 3 months before the trial. The construction of the new house was progressing slowly, but Elena had learned that in the countryside, everything had its own rhythm. It wasn't like the city, where everything had to be instant. Here, things grew in their own time, like the plants in the garden that Tomás had begun to cultivate again. It was a December morning, the air cold and crystalline. Elena was in the barn's temporary kitchen, a small space they had set up with a gas stove and some salvaged furniture, when she heard the crunch of tires on gravel. An unknown car. Her body tensed instantly, the trauma of that night still fresh in her memory. Tomás, who was repairing a beam outside, had also heard it. She saw him walk toward the entrance, his posture relaxed but alert. An older woman, about 60 years old, got out of the car, with gray hair pulled back in an elegant bun. She wore an expensive wool coat and carried a bouquet of flowers in her hands. Her face was kind, but marked by deep lines of pain. "Tomás Herrera?" she asked with a trembling voice. Tomás stopped dead. Elena saw how his body went rigid, how his hands closed into fists. "Who's asking?" he responded coldly. "I'm Marta Cisneros," said the woman. My son was the driver of the truck that killed your family." The silence that followed was so dense that Elena felt she couldn't breathe. She came out of the barn, instinctively placing herself beside Tomás, whose face had turned to stone. "Leave," said Tomás, his voice low and dangerous. "Now." "Please," Marta begged, taking a step forward with the flowers. I need you to listen. My son died 3 months ago, cancer, and his last words." Her voice broke. "His last words were your name. He lived tormented by what he did. He took his own life slowly, drinking, destroying himself because he couldn't live with the guilt." "Good," Tomás exploded, his voice like thunder. "I hope he suffered every second." Marta didn't back down. Tears ran down her cheeks. "Yes, he suffered, as you have suffered, as I have suffered losing my only son. We all pay for that day, Tomás. All of us. He chose to get in that truck drunk. He chose to kill my wife and daughter." "I know," said Marta softly, "and nothing I say will change that. But I came here because I need you to know I'm sorry. I need you to know that if I could change that day, give my life to return your family to you, I would do it without hesitation. And I came to bring you this." From her purse, she pulled out a wrinkled envelope. She extended it toward Tomás with trembling hands. He didn't take it. Elena, feeling the torture in him, took it for him. "It's a letter," Marta explained. "He wrote it before he died, for you. I kept it for 3 months because I didn't have the courage to come. But he made me promise I would deliver it to you. Please, read it when you're ready, or never read it. It's your decision." She stood there, vulnerable, waiting for something. Forgiveness? Understanding? But Tomás just turned his back and walked toward the forest behind the barn, his figure disappearing among the pines. Marta left the flowers on the ground. Tell him I'm sorry. For everything." Elena nodded, unable to speak. She watched the car drive away and then looked at the envelope in her hand. She could feel the weight of years of contained pain in that paper. The letter that night. Tomás didn't return until after midnight. Elena waited for him in the barn, the letter on the table, unopened. When he finally entered, he smelled of pine and cold earth. He had been punishing himself again, walking through the frozen forest as he did in his worst days. He sat on the floor in front of the stove, not looking at her. "You don't have to read it," said Elena softly, sitting beside him. "I know," he murmured. Minutes passed in silence. Finally, he extended his hand. She gave him the envelope. With trembling fingers, he opened it. The letter was written in shaky handwriting, the words smudged in some places. Tears, whiskey. Tomás read aloud, his voice breaking. "Mr. Herrera, I have no right to ask you for anything. I have no right to your time, to your ears, to your forgiveness. But I'm dying, and cowards like me need to confess before the end. I got in that truck knowing I had been drinking. I told myself it was okay, that it was only a few kilometers, that I had driven worse other times. 5 minutes of selfishness. That's all I needed to destroy 2 innocent lives and yours. I've tried to kill myself 3 times since then. My mother found me each time. But cancer is going to finish what I didn't have the courage to do. And I'm glad. I'm glad to die, because every day I lived after that accident was a torture I deserved. I saw your daughter. In the last seconds before the impact, I saw her in the back seat. She was smiling. She wore a yellow dress with sunflowers. That image is the last thing I see every night before I sleep, and the first thing I see every morning. I'm not asking for forgiveness. That would be obscene. I only ask that you know that no one hated me more than I hated myself, and that when I die, I hope there's a hell, because it's the only place I deserve to be. If there's something after this, I promise I'll spend eternity trying to protect your family from wherever they are now. Diego Cisneros." When he finished, Tomás dropped the letter. His shoulders trembled. Elena hugged him as he finally, after 5 years, cried, not with rage, but with the pure, raw pain of a wound that had never been able to close. "She wore a dress with sunflowers," Tomás whispered through sobs. "It was her favorite. I put it on her that morning because we were going to visit her grandmother. How did he know? How did he know that detail?" "Because he was there," said Elena softly. "And he's lived with that all these years, just like you. Is that supposed to make me feel better? Knowing that he suffered?" "No," Elena admitted. "But maybe it allows you to stop carrying the hate. Hate is heavy, Tomás. I've seen you carry it. It's killing you as much as cancer killed him." Tomás pulled away, wiping his face with trembling hands. "I don't know how to forgive that. I don't know if I can." "You don't have to forgive him today," said Elena. "Or tomorrow, or ever, if you can't. But maybe you can stop punishing yourself for having survived." He looked at her, his eyes red and swollen, and in them Elena saw something she hadn't seen before. Hope. A fragile and terrifying hope. The testimony. 2 weeks later, Elena faced her own demon. The date of the preliminary hearing had arrived, and that meant she would have to see Alarcón face to face for the first time since she fled. The courtroom in the capital was packed. Journalists, environmental activists, defense lawyers in 3,000 euro suits. And there, in the center, sitting with the confidence of a man who had never faced consequences, Ricardo Alarcón. When their eyes met, he smiled. A small, private smile that said, "I can still destroy you." Elena felt her legs falter. The room began to spin. It was too much. It was too soon. Why had she thought she could do this? A large, rough hand took hers. Tomás. He had driven 4 hours from the farm, in the suit he hadn't worn since his family's funeral, to be here. To be with her. "Breathe," he murmured. "I'm here. You're not alone." She breathed. Once, twice. The room stopped spinning. When they called her to the stand, she walked with her head high. Tomás was in the front row, his eyes never leaving her. The interrogation was brutal. Alarcon's lawyer, a shark named Mendez, tried to destroy her credibility. "Miss Valdés, isn't it true that you were fired for theft of corporate property?" "I wasn't fired. I resigned after discovering criminal activities." "And isn't it true that you fled instead of reporting your alleged findings through the appropriate channels?" "I fled because they tried to murder me." "Do you have proof of this alleged murder attempt?" Elena looked directly at Alarcón. "I have a wrecked car. I have medical reports. And I have 2 corpses of men who worked for your client." The murmur in the room was instant. The judge banged his gavel. Mendez smiled as if she had fallen into a trap. "Ah, yes. The men who died on Mr. Herrera's property. Men who, according to your testimony, were killed by Mr. Herrera in an act of disproportionate violence. Isn't your testimony convenient? Isn't it possible that you and Mr. Herrera fabricated this story after the fact?" "Objection!" shouted the prosecutor. "Speculation." "Sustained," said the judge. But the damage was done. Elena saw the doubt on the jurors' faces. Mendez had planted the seed. Maybe she and Tomás were the criminals, not Alarcón. That night, in the cheap hotel where they were staying, Elena broke down. "They're going to win," she sobbed. "They're going to twist this, and they're going to get away, and it will all have been for nothing." Tomás held her, letting her cry until there were no more tears. "Listen to me," he finally said, lifting her chin so she would look at him. "That man in that room, Alarcón, believes he's won because he has money and power. But there's something he doesn't have." "What?" "The truth, and people who are willing to die for it." Tomás took her face in his hands. "You ran toward danger when everyone else would have fled. You stole that evidence knowing what it would cost you. And I killed to protect you because it was the right thing. There's no jury in the world that won't see that." "What if it's not enough?" "Then we fight again," he said simply. "And again, and again, until it is." Elena kissed him, desperate to believe him, desperate for his strength. "I love you," she whispered against his lips. It was the first time she said it. The words hung between them, enormous and terrifying. Tomás closed his eyes as if those words were physical pain. When he opened them, there were tears in them. "I love you too," he said, his voice breaking, "and that terrifies me. Because the last time I loved someone like that, the world took them from me." "The world isn't going to take me," Elena promised. "I'm more stubborn than that." He laughed, a wet, broken sound, and kissed her with a ferocity that spoke of years of loneliness finally broken. The victory. The verdict came 3 months later. The trial had lasted weeks, each day a new hell of technical testimony, financial documents, and hostile witnesses. But finally, the jury retired. When they returned, Elena could barely breathe. Tomás squeezed her hand so hard it hurt. "In the case of the state versus Ricardo Alarcón and Aqua Pura Consortium," said the jury foreman, "we find the defendant guilty on all charges." The room exploded. Alarcón, for the first time, lost his composure. He stood up, shouting obscenities before the bailiffs restrained him. Elena collapsed into Tomás's arms, crying with relief and exhaustion. They had won. Against all odds, they had won.